What's going on, guys? Welcome back. My name is Brandon, and today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of plasma cutting. Stick around. Welcome back, guys. This is a 55 amp plasma cutter, and today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of owning a plasma cutter. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? I'm going to set it all up. We're going to do some cuts. We're going to use it. And then towards the end of the episode, I'm going to be announcing the details because I'm going to be giving this away to one lucky subscriber. So be sure to stick around to the end and watch it. There's going to be a lot of information in this video. Before we talk about the principles and the basics of how it actually works, we need to talk about the actual requirements. So this could be a positive or a negative. It needs two things. It needs electricity. This one is dual voltage, so it'll run on 120 or 240, and it needs an air source, so you're going to need an air compressor. So if you don't have either of those, you're not going to be able to run your plasma cutter. Electricity is what initiates the arc, and then the air is what gives that arc the force to be able to cut. I'll talk real briefly on air requirements for one of these plasma cutters. This is just a standard air fitting. The end of this connects to my air compressor, and my air compressor in the shop is like a 35-gallon horizontal Craftsman compressor with a 5 horsepower motor on it. So that's what runs this. It's basically the volume that you're looking for, not necessarily the size or horsepower. So if you're looking to buy a plasma cutter, just look at the specifications that the plasma cutter requires, because it will generally have a minimum required CFM rating or volume of air that it needs to operate. But I will tell you, if you have a little small pancake air compressor like this, this will work. It's not ideal, but what happens is you can only cut for a little while, because then this will run out of air and then it needs to recharge itself, and then you can cut for a little bit longer. So this will work, like I said, but it's not ideal. Having a larger compressor with a larger capacity is what you really want with a plasma cutter. Another concern to think about with your plasma cutter is that you're going to need a dedicated circuit for the plasma cutter. So you're going to want to plug this into a receptacle that is just dedicated to this, because these draw a lot of power. So you won't be able to have your air compressor and your plasma cutter plugged into the same circuit, because you're going to trip it. So that can be another concern for you. If you only have like one outlet in your workshop, you're not going to be able to plug in both. What you can do to get around that is charge up your air compressor, turn off the switch, and then cut for a while, and then when you notice that your air is starting to dwindle down, shut everything off, snap your compressor back on, let it build back up, and repeat that process. That will work too if you're in a pinch. And we're also going to verify the output amperage with an instrument versus what the actual dial says. So if the dial says we're putting out 30 amps, are we actually getting 30 amps to the tool? Sometimes the manufacturers of these machines will write, they'll make this scale go up to, let's say, 50 amps, but there's no way that the machine could put out 50 amps. We're going to find out if that's the case with this instrument. Now, whoever wins this machine, I don't have a whole lot of spare consumables around for plasma cutters, so I am going to be using the equipment that comes with this plasma cutter. I'm going to be setting it all up, putting it all together, and doing a demonstration here today, and then when I'm all done, I'll take it all apart, box this thing back up, and I'm going to ship this off to one lucky subscriber. So there is going to be some setup that we have to do to this, and this is going to be a flow meter, because we need to adjust how much air is getting to the machine. So that's like a regulator, and it's also got a water separator on it. It's real important when you have a plasma cutter that you have dry shop air. If you have air that's wet, what will happen is it just wears out your consumable parts. This is what does the cutting. These actually will prematurely wear out if you have moisture in your air. I'll show you this stuff close up here as we get going. So I'm already starting to get a little baffled as to how this gets hooked up, because I'm not familiar with having two inlets. So you've got this orange line that goes in, but you also have this at the bottom, and I don't know what that word is. GRSIWLET. Seems like that might be like inlet, because it comes with all this stuff. So it had a barbed fitting here, and you can see the flow direction is this way, okay? So I've got my inlet for my air compressor that just clips on there. Then it comes with this almost like grip type fitting, and the threads on this fitting only thread into this port. This port's bigger than this, so this can only go in this. So I know that this has got to go to this. Then that just leaves an outlet, and they give you this little barbed fitting for that. So I've got a barbed fitting here. So that kind of goes out to this. And then this other leftover barbed fitting, I think, would be for your inlet side, because that's the right size thread. And a lot of them come with this little barbed fitting on the inlet. So, but we're not using that because I'm using a quick connect fitting. But I guess my confusion is why are there two inlet lines? And this is the regulator. This regulates the air up or down. I guess once we get this hooked up and then we pull the trigger and we start turning this regulator, we will know if this is actually regulating the air up or down, because we'll hear the air volume increase and decrease as we turn this as it comes out the torch. So let me get the torch hooked up and we will get back to it. But yeah, I'm going to leave as much of this set up like this as I can for you guys. I'll put it in the box. That way there's just less you have to fiddle with. You could obviously trim this up a little bit and make it shorter, but I didn't want to go cutting anything. I haven't cut anything to length. You could definitely neaten this up by shortening it, but I'm going to leave that up to whoever wins this. Now the torch for this is actually pretty nice. It actually has what's called a drag tip on it. Now do you see on the end how it has like a little cross pattern? What that is that allows you to touch this right onto the metal work surface, because these little crosses give the metal or the molten metal a place basically to squirt out from. So you can actually touch this right on your metal and drag it right down it to make your cut, and that's what this is for. However, if you can maintain a very short distance from this contact tip to your workpiece, you will extend and prolong the life of these consumables considerably. And before we get this hooked up, I just want to kind of show you what is involved in this. Like I said, all this operates on is electricity and air. So air and electricity come out this center contact point. Now when your consumables wear out, generally it won't be this. This is a ceramic cup. Usually these just get broken from dropping the torch on the ground, so you won't go through these very often. Consumables for this type of machine are super common and they're super cheap. You can get like a pack of 50 for like $12. This piece right here is one of the pieces that actually is a consumable piece that you'll go through a lot. This little ceramic diffuser disc inside right here, not so much. And this piece right here, the barrel piece, yeah, this little copper barrel piece, that's another piece that you go through quite regularly. But again, it all depends on the material thickness that you're cutting, and it also depends on how dry your air is. And if you're doing cuts at like pierce metal, like basically putting a hole in it, it lasts a lot less longer because it'll tend to get some blowback inside of this, which will actually wear out your consumables. A pack of consumables probably lasts me well over a year. That gives you guys an idea of how long this stuff lasts. The way it works is a little trigger here that activates the air, and it activates the electricity that comes out the end. The connections on the other end are really simple. You have an air connection here, and you have your switch connection here. This is just the on-off switch that's on that trigger. It's only going one way, so you put that on, snug that. We connect our air fitting. We'll snug this up a little bit. Good. Then we just have a working lead or ground or earth, and that goes into this right here. I was just noticing this machine doesn't come with like a conversion plug, so this machine will run on 120 or 240, but in order to do that you need an adapter plug. But these manufacturers, it just drives me nuts when they set a machine up this way for this reason. This has the wrong end on it. This needs to have a welder plug end on it, a male welder plug end. And a male welder plug end looks like this. So this end should have been on that machine, but they don't put that end on there because it would cost more for that end versus this end. So you take your adapter, which is 240 on one end and 120 on the other, and you would actually just plug your welding machine into that, okay? Now you can plug this into 120. That's how the machine would run on 120. If I took this adapter right now and plugged this into a 120 volt wall outlet, all that's coming out of this is 120 volt. And no other tool can plug into this other than a welder plug. The issue I have with this is that this is your wall receptacle. This is putting out 240 volts. Okay, so in order to plug 240 volts into this machine, you'd have to have a male plug go into this, right? And then it's going to come out to a female plug to accept this. So in other words, one end of it is going to be this configuration of this plug, and then the other end is going to be this configuration, okay? So that you can plug your welder into it. The problem with that configuration is now any tool can plug into this, but actually 240 is coming out of this. So if you're not the wiser and this is laying on the floor somewhere and 50 feet away and somebody grabs up the cord and goes to plug their grinder in it, they're going to have 240 volts on the end of this 120 volt plug. Super dangerous. So these manufacturers really need to stop sending these dual voltage machines with this plug configuration on it. They need to put a welder plug 240 volt configuration on it. So they did not supply an adapter piece for this machine, and I'm guessing for that reason, just because it's a safety concern. We had one other machine act this same way not too long ago, guys, and my recommendation would be to lop this plug off, put a 240 volt welder plug on it, then you're good, you're in business. Or if you have no 240 volt and you have no intentions of using it on 240 volt, you're all set. You can use it just as it is, but you're probably only going to get maybe 30 amps out of it, maxed out. Versus if it's on 240, you're going to get hopefully 55 amps. But we're going to find that out today. I don't have an adapter plug that adapts this back over to 240, but we'll find out what it maxes out at on 120. Alright, so let's plug it in. It's on 120 volt. We'll supply some air to the unit. There we go. Now we'll turn it on. And let's check the dial and see what it goes up to. 55 amps on 120 volt. Logistically, I don't think that that's possible on 120 volts, but we'll see. I would think somewhere maybe around the range of 30, 35, but we'll find out. I figured out why the two air hoses on the back. Really simple. What they're doing is that both of these, okay, are regulated air sources. So this one is actually going out to the actual cutting torch end, and this one is actually feeding the gauge on the front side. So rather than them doing that adapter inside the machine, they're doing it outside the machine. So got one to the gauge, one to the torch. So that solved that mystery. So here's your air pressure gauge, and this is your amperage setting. So 0 to 55. That's your on-off, and that's pretty much it. You just ground your workpiece that you're cutting, and we'll be doing all this here pretty soon. Then squeeze the trigger when you want to make your cut. Now it's real important that you match your air pressure to your amperage, because you wouldn't want to, if you had a cutting torch, just turn your, oxygen and acetylene up as high as it would go to cut just a real thin piece of material. It's not necessary, and it's going to wear out your consumables quicker than necessary. So I have a chart, and I'll put a link down in the video description that you guys can check out, because you really want to match your air pressure to your amperage. That way you're going to get the most life you can out of your consumables, and you're also going to get the best cut possible. We're almost ready to start cutting, guys, and we're going to start talking about more advantages and disadvantages. So what can you cut with a plasma cutter? Basically anything that is metallic that conducts electricity. So you can cut steel, carbon steel, stainless steel, aluminum, you can cut flat plate, you can cut shapes, copper, cast iron, brass. If it conducts electricity, you can cut it with a plasma cutter. So in my opinion, the biggest advantage to a plasma cutter would be to cut out shapes on flat plate. This machine just works great for doing that, as opposed to, let's say, an oxyacetylene setup where you got to buy oxygen and you got to buy acetylene. This, you don't need any of that. Like I said, as long as you've got an air source and you've got electricity, you can cut metal, and that's all this takes. There are a couple drawbacks to it though. When cutting out, like say two-sided shapes, they're not as precise as, let's say, like a saw, because you're cutting this edge, then you're going to end up cutting this edge. Box tubing, that's also problematic, because now you're cutting four sides. You're cutting there, there, and you're working your way all around the tube, and you're making 4 cuts instead of like using a saw and just making 1. The edge of the material that you cut with a plasma cutter, that edge is going to become hardened. And I don't know quite why, but it does. So that is going to dull tools when you go to work it. So if it's important to you that you got to, say, drill a hole near an edge, you definitely don't want to burn it through with a plasma cutter. Same goes for, let's say you want to pierce a hole through a piece of metal. You make the hole and you realize that you have to enlarge it with a drill bit. That's going to be real hard on your drill bit because the perimeter of that hole is going to be hardened from whatever this does to the heat source of the metal. It hardens it. I think it's a combination between the metal being heated up and cooled with the air that causes the metal to harden, but that's what happens. That's what I think happens. I'm not a metallurgist, but I just know that the metal does harden after you've cut it with a plasma cutter. So in my opinion, the biggest advantage to a plasma cutter is to be able to cut flat plate, be able to do it cleanly and inexpensively, because it cleans up really nice and it has very little heat on the edge of the part, just because it cuts so fast and cleanly. The disadvantage, as I said, would be cutting into, you know, sectional pieces like angle iron, box tubing, round tube would be problematic because you're making multiple cuts on it. Now it's time to set up our machine, guys. I've got some 1/8 inch steel plate here, and we need to set the amperage and the air settings on the machine, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Sorry about the glare, guys. So go to my YouTube page and scroll over to the community right there. Click on community, and you're going to go down a little bit. These are the winners. You'll see all the winners on the community page and a lot of postings. This is also over on my Facebook page as well. There we go, right there. There is the chart that you're looking for. And you can screenshot this, and if you go over to my Facebook page, you can also download it. If you look right here, guys, this is the amperage column. This is the pressure column. And it's saying that 1/8 inch needs 20 amps of power and 30 psi of air right there. So 20 amps, 30 psi for 1/8 inch material. So we'll turn on our machine. Set our display for 20 amps. And then we'll turn the knob on the back clockwise until we get 30 psi. And that looks about to be 30 psi right about there. Now for basic safety equipment, guys, you want like a cotton or leather type shirt, some nice decent gloves that protect your arms and your skin, long sleeve, either a welding hood with an adjustable setting on it, or at a bare minimum cutting torch goggles. So whichever you choose, but at a bare minimum you definitely want cutting torch goggles. This is hard on your eyes. This light is way too bright to be looking at. It's not quite as bright as like if you were welding, but it's still bright nonetheless, and if you looked at it long enough it can give you arc flash. If you ever had arc flash of your eyes, not a lot of fun. It actually feels like somebody sprinkled sand in your eyes, and it usually happens either right before you go to bed, or usually it might even wake you up in the middle of the night, and you wake up and your eyes are just burning. It feels like I said, somebody threw sand in your eyes. And the only real cure for that is time for your eyes to heal. Basically it's a sunburn on your eyeballs, so not a lot of fun. You can do eye drops, it helps a little bit, but you know, I had it not too long ago shooting a test video, just looking away, just briefly, but the amperage was just so high that I actually got arc flash, so and I should have known better. So, but it does happen and it's no fun. Alright guys, so with our air set and our amperage set, all we're going to do is put this on the edge of our workpiece, and we are just going to press the trigger and drag it along the workpiece, and the edge of this metal will cut right off. Here we go. Hear that air coming out? That'll probably run for just a little bit to cool down the tip of the torch, and then it shuts off automatically. Now the byproduct of cutting is it leaves behind what's called dross or slag, but that comes off super easy with a chipping hammer. You just hit it and that will come off clean. Let me show you. You see that, guys? You see how smooth and clean that edge is now? Right here. Nice and clean. Very little prep work, very little grinding it would need. I think I also forgot to mention, guys, that this earth or ground or working lead, that is connected to the piece that you're cutting. So I've got this piece clamped to my table, and I've got the working lead clamped to my clamp, so this piece is making a full circuit, full contact. So as you're cutting, it's important that you have this parallel up and down. You don't want it leaning at an angle unless you're trying to make a bevel, because that's the cut that it'll make. So you want this straight up and down, perpendicular this way. You don't want any angle this way or this way. Pretty much just straight up and down, and drag it along the workpiece. Like I said, if you can hold it a little bit above your workpiece, just this tiny, tiny gap, you'll extend the life of your consumables considerably. Now, if you don't have a steady hand, any slight movement in your hand is going to be transferred into your workpiece. So if you've got a little wobble in your hand, you're going to get a little wobble in your workpiece. It's going to show up. So if you're cutting along and all of a sudden you have a little bobble like that, it's going to show up. One way to get a nice straight cut is to use a guide. And I use a guide a lot to make nice, straight, smooth cuts. And I'll show you how that works. So here I'm just using a regular framing speed square, nothing fancy. This is actually primarily made for wood, but I use it for plasma cutting, because the great thing about this is that it'll space this contact tip off the workpiece just the right amount. So like I said, you can normally just drag this contact tip along the workpiece because it has this special cross-sectioned tip, but when you use this speed square, look how that's just ever so slightly off the edge of our work. Again, it'll run for a little bit just to keep this tip all cooled down. It's all automatic, and then it stops. Take a chipping hammer and just knock that dross off. Look at that. Yeah, it's pretty cool to the touch. There it is. This is the piece that I cut right here. You see how smooth that is? Nice smooth cut. Requires very little tooling to get that perfect. So what about aluminum? Same thing. We'll clamp down a piece of aluminum to our workbench, and I'll clamp the working lead onto it. There we go. So it completes the circuit. And we are ready to cut. Let's make a couple cuts on it. And we're still at 20 amps and 30 psi of air. And there you go. That's the little bit of dross right there. Not much. Not a whole lot of cleanup that would be required for that, as you can see. That's the top side. That's the side we cut it from. And that's the bottom side. If you heard the difference between like pilot arc and non-pilot arc, the difference between pilot arc is when you hit the trigger with a pilot arc machine, an actual arc will shoot out the end. This one does not do that, okay? One of the downsides to a non-pilot arc machine is that it requires you to make contact with the bare metal. A pilot arc machine doesn't need to make contact with the bare metal for the arc to initiate. On a pilot arc machine, you just hit the trigger, and if this is covered with thick paint, rust, scale, whatever, the machine will burn right through that, and it'll just work its way through all the paint and all that garbage. It does not need to make contact with ground in order to initiate the arc. With this type of machine, which is non-pilot arc, if you had a lot of scale, rust, or thick paint, you'd actually have to scrape away a little bit of the paint just to get the initiated arc started. And once the arc started, then it'll just continue to run. It'll burn everything out of the way as it progresses. But just know, like, if you were, cutting up panels that had a lot of rust or had a lot of paint on them, a non-pilot arc machine may not be ideal for you. If you are, working on primarily fairly clean steel like we do here that doesn't have a lot of rust or paint on it, non-pilot arc would be just fine, and it'll save you a little bit of money as well. If you really want to know all kinds there is to know about plasma cutting, I have a video that's really popular. It's called Plasma Cutting 101, and it's really geared towards people who don't know a whole lot about plasma cutting but are interested in thinking that they may want to get one. It gets a lot of positive comments. A lot of people are interested in it, and they say it's a pretty good video. So Plasma Cutting 101, I'll have a link down below, and I'll put one up above for you guys to check out. Let's try to cut into this piece of angle, and I'll show you how this works. We're still working with 1/8 inch stuff, so we're not going to have to change our settings. I'd probably do this in like 2 passes. I would come in this way and stop, and then come in this way. I guess I could come this way, but I wouldn't want to be shooting it up into my face. So we will start on the edge of this and work my way towards me. Just like that. Now I would come down the back side and meet that cut on the other side. And again, we just clean off this piece, get this dross off here. You got to remember, this edge is now hardened, so if you need to like run a file over it or something like that, file's not going to be ideal because it's going to really skate across it. You can grind it, and the hardening doesn't extend back too far, so you can grind this down smooth, and then you will be past the hardening. What if you want to cut some real big stuff? This is thick. This is 5/16 plate, so thicker than 1/4 inch. Check this out. That's some thick stuff right there. I don't know if you can see it on the gauge, but that's reading 5/16. Alright, so you know what we got to do now. We got to figure out what to set the machine at. So here's 5/16 right here. Then it's saying 40 amps and 40 psi. So let's set the machine for 40 and 40 for 5/16 material. So 40, and we'll turn up our gauge. And that looks to be about 40. Now we're going to do 2 things now. Okay, so we've got this machine set on 40, and I'm going to grab an instrument that I can read while I'm cutting to see if it's actually putting out the advertised 40 amps. Now this is called a clamp-on amp meter. The way this works is you just have a conductor pass through this, and it reads its amperage or voltage, whatever you have it set to. For our case, we want to know if it's putting out 40 amps. So we are going to clamp it back here, and then we'll turn on our machine, turn on our instrument, and then we change the scale to DC right there, amperage. Alright guys, here we are. Our machine is set to 40 amps, and our meter is set to read that. Off camera, I am going to be cutting that 5/16 plate and reading what this amperage is. Hopefully it's showing 40, because that's what the display says. Here we go. Wow guys, that was pretty consistent at 34 amps. And if you're wondering if it cut it cleanly, and it cut it easily, which is impressive. That is 120 volts, and for that to cut that off cleanly, I'm impressed with that. Got a little bit of dross on the back side. We can clean that up with a chipping hammer. And there we go. That's smooth on the back side and smooth on the front. There it is, guys. That's a nice clean cut. Now the wobble is me. That's my hand wobbling around. But yeah, that cut it just fine. No issues there whatsoever. But I did see 34 on a gauge that says 40. And I don't, like I said, I don't think we're going to be able to get much more than 35 amps. Or I was thinking 30, 35 amps out of this machine when it's on 120 volt. 120 can only put out so much amperage. Let's turn this up to 55, and I bet you're not going to see any increase. I bet we'll see still 34 on that. So let's do it again. I'm guessing you're going to see 34 amps again. Here we go. Nope, 37. Alright, that's what I would expect. I was running at 37 amps. I had said probably 35, even though the machine is showing 55. That's just the limit on this. Rather than, you know, that's the circuitry that they are, I believe that they probably, the way they have this wired, they could make this, when it senses 120 volts, they could make this display here so that it doesn't read any more than probably, you know, like 35. We saw 37, but that's pretty much maxed out. That's all this machine can make for power on 120 volt. I wish I had an adapter because I'd love to try this out and see actually what this puts out on 240 volt, but I guess what impressed me the most so far with this machine was its consistency on the meter. There wasn't all these up and down fluctuations in the power. It seemed to be very, you know, clean and steady power, which is what you want when you're, you know, plasma cutting. You don't want to have, you know, an up or down amperage. So I would say that, you know, all in all, this was pretty close to what I would expect it to be. The readout was fairly close, but the power was consistent. And you can easily cut 5/16 material at home on 120 volt. And I don't know about you, but most DIY hardcore people aren't using 5/16 plate a lot. I know that I don't use it a whole lot with the stuff I do, so it's just good to know, I guess, for this machine that you can cut 5/16 on 120 volt. So you may not even want to put this on 240 volt unless you just occasionally want to do stuff thicker than 5/16. So, you know, maybe 3/8. So you could probably easily do 3/8 with this on 240 volt, I would guess. And that's it, guys. That's all there is to it. Plasma cutters are a ton of fun. They're super handy, and if you guys are used to using like oxyacetylene, you don't have to mess around and pay for all that gas, which is kind of nice to not be able to have to pay that expense. If you want to get in on this giveaway, guys, one lucky winner is going to win this on February 10th. If you want to get in on this, you got to be subscribed to the channel, and you need to comment down below, like the video. Read the rules, really simple, and I will announce the giveaway right at February 10th. The winner will have like 4 days to get a hold of me. After that, I send the welder off to you. It costs you $0. I don't reach out to you. I don't do any other thing. I announce it publicly, the winner, who it is. You got 4 days to reach out to me. If I don't hear from you within 4 days, we end up opening this up again and doing it all over again to some other lucky winner. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you get the notifications because I announce it here. I announce it on my Facebook. I announce it on Instagram. I announce it everywhere. So if you are the winner of this machine, I want to be able to give it to you. And again, it costs you nothing. And I won't reach out to you and ask you for shipping. I won't reach out for you and ask you for anything. Other than that, I announce the winner. You need to contact me. Give me your address. I will mail it to you free of charge. Costs you not even a dime. Now I have a pretty cool story for you guys. This machine was donated to me from a subscriber and a viewer of the channel, which I think is awesome. The backstory behind this is that he reached out to me and he had a friend or family member that just passed away. And this basically was the money he set aside to buy this gift for his friend. So instead of buying the gift, he donated this to the channel, purchased it and donated it to the channel for us to use here to give back, which is kind of fitting because he had someone pass away in his family, and the week before Christmas my mom passed away. So if you guys have been wondering why I've been MIA and I haven't been doing the videos as often, just real quick, I don't usually share my family business, but I just kind of want you guys to know what's going on. My mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer about a year ago. We had been going back and forth to Boston quite regularly, and she had inoperable cancer up in this area of her head. She's been on hospice for probably about 9 months or so, plus or minus. So I'm an only child and I'm the only family she has, so that has taken me kind of out of the workshop, not being able to do the videos and like I normally do and the regular every Friday. So I know you guys are commenting like I haven't been around a lot. Well, that's what's been going on. I've just been taking care of my mom. Like I say, she passed away the week before Christmas. So there's just been a lot of stuff going on in my personal life. So it really means a lot that this viewer reached out and kind of did this because we're kind of like paying it forward. His memory is going to kind of live on, and someone else is going to be happy for this. Until next week, guys, I will see you then. Take care, stay safe, like, comment, subscribe. See ya.